Welcome back.
Welcome to Decision Space, the only show to take place right here in the space between the turns in your favorite games. I'm Brendan Hansen.
I'm Jake Friedman.
And I'm Tyler Hackmann.
And this is the podcast about decisions in games.
And this is a very special episode because we're going to be creating the comprehensive tier list for Feld games. That
Definitive.
is games designed by designer Stefan Feld. And we are joined by a very special guest, a friend of mine, a member of the Laughing Table Friends. It's none other than Tyler Hackmann. Tyler, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much. Excited to be here.
So maybe you could just take one quick second to introduce who you are as a gamer to the audience, maybe your connection to the show, your connection to Feld, and then we'll get right into the tier list.
Yeah, definitely. It's a long time listener to the show. Jake and I met at Geekway Mini last year, and that was kind of my midpoint in terms of getting into games. In terms of games, I really love 4X games is really kind of my bread and butter. But I also really love really unique action selection games, and I think that's why I've been gravitated towards Feld so much. Is just because every game feels different. People talk about him as having a lot of point salad games, but the way you approach those point salad feels different every time, and feels like he's really innovating in the space. And so I love playing his stuff.
So you've only been gaming for a couple of years now, in board games, is that right?
Yeah, about 3 years or so.
3 years. Okay. Relatively new, but you've gone really wide in that time. And definitely on as far as the three hosts on this episode, we'll actually be bringing the most comprehensive knowledge of Feld. So we'll be leaning on you for some blind spots that Brendan and I both have.
Yeah, I had a one-time goal to collect every Feld game. I've since abandoned that, but that's why I played so many.
Is that because you've decided that some of the ones you don't have just aren't of interest, or they're so out of print that they're just Herculeanly expensive for a game that is not interesting?
We'll get into it, but I found a couple duds, and I think since then I'm okay, I don't need to own everyone.
Pump the brakes,
But Feld is coming out with a 4X game this year, which I could not be more hyped about, because I think that's the perfect mesh of my interests.
Interesting. Okay, that's it. After we do the tier list, at the very end of the episode, you got to tell us anything you know about the Feld 4X game. But I feel
sadly, I just told you everything I do about it.
Amazing.
Perfect, because we don't have any time for that. This is going to be a jam-packed episode. I think we have 20 games here that we're going to try and create consensus on. Any one of those could be a massive pitfall in that plan. We don't know when that is going to hit, but we know it should be a good discussion. Before we get into that, just want to make a quick appeal for reviews. If you like listening to this podcast, do us a solid. Please give us a review or rate this podcast, especially if you're rating on Spotify and rating and reviewing on Apple Podcasts. That goes a tremendous way to helping us grow the show and get more listeners, which is awesome. So thanks so much to everyone who's reviewed it in the past. And if you have a second to do it, thanks so much for being a new reviewer. All right.
Awesome.
On with the show.
Okay, so why are we going to spend an entire episode ranking Stefan Feld games? We've never done this before. Previously, we've gone in depth on Kramer and Kiesling, and I would say that Stefan Feld is a really unique designer. Tyler, you were sort of mentioning there's a standout style here that few people are working in beyond Feld. And I think among Eurogame, strategy game, modern strategy game designers that I've played, his games most distinctly feel as if you could sit down and play a prototype and not have a designer associated and probably guess it was Feld if you had played enough Feld games. And he was designing in the same sort of feel, which is really interesting and sort of unique. He's published more than 30 games. He's very prolific. And also, we've covered a lot of games of Feld's on the show, so I guess it feels natural to kind of delve in. But yeah, why else? Why are we covering Feld?
For me, he's probably my favorite designer if I did the mental tally. And I think also the designer of whom I've played the most unique games, which makes it Feld uniquely positioned to do this type of a tier list episode versus other designers who, maybe we've gone a little bit deeper on, thinking of Kramer and Kiesling, but really only explored a few of the games. Here I've got a lot of games played, but relatively, fewer times. Looking at most of these I played maybe 3 or 4 times each, with some outliers.
I think he's probably my most played designer too. And I would say his games aren't always my favorite, but I always appreciate that it feels like he's bringing like a new mechanic into the fold that I haven't seen before. There's something like brand new. It's not just like a riff on something else. It feels like truly in and of itself.
Totally.
Yeah. And when I'm playing a Feld game, for me, so many of these games just feel like gaming comfort food. They aren't always challenging me the most in making me feel stressed out, like I'm fighting tooth and nail for every point. They're not the heaviest games, but in many ways, I feel like for me and what I'm looking for in a game night, they're often like hitting that sweet spot of kind of midweight Euro complexity, slightly lower on the interaction scale, but still really fun and interesting to engage with.
I think for me, just right as we transition into actually doing our rankings, what's so cool about Feld is kind of what you just highlighted, Jake, that oftentimes he wants you to have the tools to really run in his games and just accomplish a lot. You start a game like the Castles of Burgundy and you just have nothing before you. And by the end, you've scored 250 points and you feel like you've completely built out this really cool thing in front of you. And there's not as much resistance in his games often towards doing what you want to accomplish beyond sort of overcoming the novel action selection mechanism that's there. There's some exceptions and some fun exceptions, I think, that I will be ranking highly in this tier list. But it sounds like we should get into it. Jake, maybe throughout the show, you'll emphasize, or Tyler, you as well, where you think those novel action selection mechanisms are coming to the fore. Because so often people just sort of brush Feld games aside and say, these are just point salad games, sort of almost pejoratively. And I think that there's a lot more interesting things going on from a decisions perspective here. So as we go through, I know we have to move fast. Maybe we can highlight interesting decisions along the way.
Yeah. So we're going to be going through all these games and we're going to be assigning each game a spot on our tier list. We have 6 tiers in front of us and I'll count them down from best to worst. S, all-time great games within the Feld universe, right? So we're comparing games sort of like to each other here. And because, Tyler and I think Brendan to some extent think Feld is one of the best designers out there, it's safe to say that, an S tier Feld game is also a game we're recommending across gaming in general. Then we've got A, fantastic Feld, B, great bread and butter, C, kind of average for Feld, then D, below average Feld, and F, these are ones that easy to pass on, don't feel bad for missing them. At least for me, every game that I've played on this list, I've had fun with. So I want to make that distinction too. If a game ends up on the F tier, and we're going to put some games there because that's important to me, right? If we're going to have this list, we're going to put some games in each category, or else why have it? That's not saying that's a bad game. That's just saying it's one of the worst games amongst Feld's very impressive design credits.
Awesome. And I would say sort of S tier, anyone should be, whether you like Feld or not, it should be of interest. A and B, right? These are great games. C and below, if you're not a Feld fan, probably pass. Does that sound right? Okay, cool.
Or maybe don't run from it, but don't necessarily seek it out.
Sprint. Okay. Can we start in France? Can we go to Notre Dame?
Yes, let's do it. All right. Do you want to introduce the first game, Tyler?
Yeah, sure, I can do that. So Notre Dame is a game where every player has their own deck of cards, which they shuffle, which each card pertains to a different action they can take on their board. And then they'll draw 3 cards off the top of their deck, choose one, pass their hand to the left. Again, choose one card and keep going until you have 3 cards left. So it's a drafting game, and each action allows you to put different cubes out onto the board, your particular player board, which each cube also pertains to a different action. So in a way, as you're taking actions, you're strengthening the strength of them, and all towards, of course, in very Feld fashion, trying to get more points. Some will help you build engines. Some will just get you raw points. Some will help you kind of avoid rats and plagues and different things. There's different abilities that come out each round as well. Anything I missed in that explanation?
No, I think that's perfectly adequate to give people sort of a sense of what's going on. When I think of Notre Dame, it's a game I've played maybe 3 or 4 times. An incredibly beige, incredibly beige game. This to me feels like a perfect B tier Feld game. I feel like this is, for me, bread and butter of it's got fun action selection mechanisms, but and every time I play it, I have a great time. But it's not one I'm rushing to get off the shelf and play more and explore more. It's kind of got that thing where, like, once you've played it once, you feel like you've experienced most of what the game has to offer. It has surprisingly good variability in that the character cards that come out are going to be different each game. So I think that's a big sort of selling point for getting it back out. And then the other really good advantage for this game is it's a really good game at 5 players too, which is pretty rare for the games we'll be talking about. So I'm kind of between A and B, but I would probably lean B. What do you think, Tyler?
Yeah, it's interesting because when thinking about this game, I was reminded how much I actually really enjoyed it from a mechanical perspective. But I think I'm really like hesitant to pull it off my shelf because of how ugly it looks. Like the graphic design does not encourage me to think about this game positively. But thinking about the mechanics, I really enjoy it, and I would say B feels about right, especially like those unique character cards. I think in like the 10-year anniversary copy I have, there's like a small expansion too, which has even more, which I'd be interested in exploring too.
Nice. Yeah.
Sounds like it's a B.
Brendan.
Yeah,
for
let's do
Notre
it.
Dame.
B.
I haven't
Sold.
played it. Yeah, this was that. All I will contribute about Notre Dame is this is known as sort of one of Feld's early big hits. This is a game where I think Feld really. It was a 2007 Spiel des Jahres recommend. I think that's before the Kennerspiel was a thing, and maybe that would have been nominated for the Kennerspiel. But it's a game that people who have been following Feld for a long time usually hold up as a standout game among his older games.
Yeah. It's a good one. B is like, you should definitely, at least for me, the way I'm thinking about it, definitely give this a shot if you get the chance. All right. So the next game we have in our list, that is in no particular order at all, is the Castles of Burgundy, the card game. And I think I'm the only person here that's played this one, which means I have carte blanche to do whatever I want with it, and they can't say anything. So essentially, what this is a pretty faithful adaptation of the board game, the Castles of Burgundy, translated into cards. So it simplifies the mechanics a little bit. You're doing a little bit of set collection here, where you're trying to get 3 cards matching the different colors in the games. You want to get 3 castle cards to score some number of points, 3 animal cards to score some number of points, and then whenever you play the card, you also get to take an effect that is evocative of the tile in the classic board game.
And it's just an open draft.
No, it's not overdraft. It's like it's kind of interesting. So you have like a hand of cards, and you can play a card down as a project, and you can have like up to 3 projects, kind of like how you would have a tile in your bay in the Castles of Burgundy. And then the cards also have a random die value, so they're multi-use cards. You can either choose to use the card as the project or use it as the die. And then you can also take like a free action, just like you would expect, right? Like discard a card to get a worker or something like that. So this is a game I've played a few times on the Yukata implementation. I'm not gonna say it's the greatest game ever. It's surprisingly fun. It works well. But if you have an option to play the Castles of Burgundy, I would pick that every time. And a lot of that's out in. I don't think you get like, for the simplified mechanics and probably shorter play length, I just don't think it does enough to really like justify its own place. So I am gonna put this one, even though I think it's like totally inoffensive. Of all the games on this list, it's maybe the one I would least be excited to play. So I'm between D and F, and I think it's gonna be hard to find games to put in the F tier, so I'm gonna go that.
Okay. And Tyler and I can say nothing about it because we haven't played it.
Sole discretion on this one.
I thought about going S tier just to really, just to see what you guys would do.
It's got Castles of Burgundy in the name. It's got to be S tier, right?
We'd have to pause the podcast and go to Yukata and play a game right now. How about, okay, so we have Castles of Burgundy and F tier. No, Castles of Burgundy, the card game. Let's switch to Aquasphere next.
I think Jake should explain Aquasphere because I don't remember that one.
All right,
but we can skip to one of my
skip
solo
one ahead.
ones, maybe.
Skip one ahead. Yeah.
Okay, what do you think, Tyler? Which we go to next? Marrakesh?
Yeah. I know a lot about Marrakesh. I could talk about Marrakesh for an hour. So I think Marrakesh is actually a really interesting one to talk so close about Notre Dame too, because it's got a lot of similarities. Where Notre Dame, you have a deck of cards where you're shuffling and you're drawing 3 and drafting them. Marrakesh is similar, where you have like, I think 12, they're called keshes, and each keshi represents a different action on your personal player board you're going to take. In each round, you're choosing 3 of your keshes, as is everyone else at the table. And then all those keshes get combined and dropped into a cube tower and fall to the bottom. And then one at a time, each player drafts a color of keshi, with the rule that you can only take up to 2 of one color at a time. So it's really interesting because you are committing to actions ahead of time, but the strength of those actions depends on how many keshi of that color you have on your player board. And each of the keshis do different things. Like there's some that you can trade in to get like goods and jewelry. There's some that just get you resources. There's some that help you move down a river track in very Feld fashion. And there's several like engine building ones that help you build your engine in slightly different ways. And so all the actions feel really interesting, but the draft feels like really important too, because you want to make sure that you get keshis so that the actions you're taking actually have like, they have momentum to them. And they build up over each round too. So you're getting more and more keshis to fill up certain areas. And then there's obviously a lot of different ways to score points as well at the end. But one of the ways to score points is by having a complete area of keshis, because each action area has about like 10 spots for individual keshis. So you want to kind of like specialize, but you're almost forced to diversify. So there's a lot of different things you're doing, all layering into the cube tower, which means that the keshis you put in, you think you're going to get, they might not come out. So it's a very like fascinating engine building game. It's also one of Feld's heavier games. Like each game is probably like 2 hours, 2.5 hours. So it gives you quite a lot of time to breathe in that space too.
Cool. And this is a newer release from Feld coming out in 2022.
Yeah, that's right. And I've really enjoyed it. I've played it 3 or 4 times now, and I got the expansion for it, which also adds some like wild keshis in the mix. So I would say it's probably an A for me. It's one of my favorite Felds.
So Marrakesh, a fantastic Feld on our tier list because Jake and I can't say squat.
Yeah. It's definitely
Great.
one of there's 2 games on this list that I haven't played that I'm most eager to try, and this is one of them. Tyler's talked up a lot, so yeah, looking forward to giving this one a try for sure.
Not Feld's only cube tower game too. We'll talk about another one a little bit later.
Let's go to the Castles of Tuscany next. So this is another game that I'm the only person who's played, so that means I get to say whatever I want about it. The Castles of Tuscany came out much later than the Castles of Burgundy. So similar to what I was just saying, it's sort of playing in the same space, but a significant departure from the original. So it does away entirely with the dice mitigation that existed in the Castles of Burgundy, and it replaces it with a Ticket to Ride style card set collection game. So what you have in front of you, similar to Castles of Burgundy, is your own personal player board of empty hexes that you're trying to fill in. But here on your turn, you'll be using the cards in your hand enable you to place a tile onto that hex, taking an action based on what the tile says. That feels very familiar. And then scoring points based on the number of spaces in that region once completely complete. This is a game that has some fun, novel kind of mechanisms. It has an interesting thing where some of the points you get are one-time points, and others will score during each of the 3 ages, really incentivizing you to score that type of point early. That's kind of cool, and that feels distinct from Castle of Burgundy, but is still kind of adding that tension. If you've listened to our most recent episode on design problems, that feels so prominent in the Castles of Burgundy. So the way some of the specific tiles work, there's an in tile that's kind of like the castle in the original game, but it just gives you like a wild tile to place anywhere. It kind of functions really cool. To cut to the chase, I think this is probably a D tier game. It just doesn't hold together as solidly as the original. And a good example of this is that because of the central Ticket to Ride style set collection mechanism, meaning you're drawing cards either from an open display or just blindly from the deck. There's one mechanism in this game. I think the way the mines work, if I recall correctly, is when you play a mine, you get to like upgrade something on your board, and one of the things you can upgrade just like allows you to draw additional cards every time you take the draw action, which is crazy powerful. And when this game originally came out, people were saying it feels like that's just like way too powerful, right? Like you have to take that kind of upgrade right away every time. And Stefan Feld actually like was on Twitter, then Twitter, now X, and like commented on that, and seemingly just like said like, actually, instead of drawing 2 cards on your turn whenever you take that action, you draw 3, and that's the rule now. Like after the game has been totally published, which I think is kind of like, if that's the case, it's just like, what is the rule? Like, where did we land with this? I don't know what it says in the later editions of this game, but I think that kind of like speaks about sort of like the looseness of this game. I still had fun when I played it. It might go a little long. I'm kind of talking myself into F tier here.
Well, Twitter hot patch. Yeah, sure. Why not? We'll move down to F tier.
Let's go F.
Okay. You've talked about the Castle of Tuscany on the show at least 3 times, and every time you end groaning. So
yeah, and it's like on myself, and it just never comes out, and I just can't imagine when it would come out. Yeah. And to be
with me, we should play that sometime.
Okay, I'll play with you. And maybe we'll probably have a great time. That's the crazy thing about the F tier games. Like I think if we played together, we'd have a great time. But for the purpose of this list, let's go F.
Took everything you love about Castles of Burgundy and said, let's make a game without it. Okay, on to Aquasphere.
Okay, Aquasphere is a really interesting Feld game. We always talk about Feld as having like novel action selection mechanisms, and this one might have one of the most novel that I've seen in board games. So novel, in fact, that it's very difficult to explain exactly how it works on this podcast. But essentially, it's like an action programming game, but not in the way that you, listener, are thinking of action programming when I say that. This is not Robo Rally, where you're like trying to sequence actions in your hand. Instead, you have the ability to move a person around an underwater station. You're going into various rooms. The main resource in this game is time. So moving through certain doors costs less time than others. So you want to really min-max that. And when you get into a room, you get to take a various action, assuming that you have a bot programmed to take that action on your personal player board. So that's you're kind of doing a personal player board puzzle and an action efficiency puzzle on a shared board, and couple that together, and it creates just like probably the most brain burny complexity that I've experienced in any Feld game. That's just kind of giving you a sense of how this plays, because it's kind of difficult to untangle the web of the rules of this game. But interesting theme, crazy kind of brain fog is the experience that I have when I play it. Tyler, I know I played this with you once. Do you have any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I think what really stands out to me from our play, and that was the only time I played it, but I remember too, in order to pass certain point thresholds, you have to have a certain resource, which as you're explaining it,
the laser,
like really punitive. Yeah, the lasers. But I remember like that was so memorable because we had one player at our table who was struggling to get past that laser. He didn't have the resource. So he just kept falling back in terms of points. And it was hilarious. So it ended up being like a much funnier game than I expected. And then I remember too, there being some really interesting like area control too, and where you get your robots. So I really liked it.
I think it stands out as being kind of like unique there too, in that Feld typically doesn't have much area control mechanism in this game, and here it's there if you like squint the right way. Like you kind of have to look for it. It's definitely not the most prominent part of the game, and I can see Brendan's confused, but basically, Brendan, on the score track, like around the board, there's like a circular score track, and whenever you cross I don't know how many, maybe it's like 0 to 30,
15.
Something like
every
that.
15 points, I think.
Yeah. Every 15 points, there's a laser, and in order to cross it, you have to spend like a black cube, whatever that represents. You're also fighting like octopus monsters off the space. So there's like crazy, interesting theming here. So it kind of stands out there too. So this is like I'm struggling. I really have enjoyed my plays this game. It's a tough one to because it's just hard to wrap your head around the first time around. I want to say it's probably B, like bread and butter. I think it's just like one notch too challenging to be like a fantastic Feld for everyone. There's going to be certain people that bounce off this really hard, but if you're looking for like just a really weird, interesting game, that's really solid. This is one not to overlook. Kind of a hidden gem almost.
Where would you put it,
Yeah.
Tyler?
I would say it's on the cusp of B and C. It feels like the most unique game Feld has made. Like it feels very weird in the best ways. Like I really enjoy it. And it's got like enough, I really like rough edges in my games and things that feel off. I think those lasers probably push it up to B for me.
All right.
Cool.
B it is.
Awesome. Our first Hall Games ranked game, and Hall is another interesting publisher for Feld, who I think lets Feld do some funky things with theming, it sounds like. That's so cool. Which we go to next? Amerigo?
Yeah.
This is one all three of us have played.
Yeah, so introduce it, Brendan.
Yeah, so this is Amerigo is a 2013 released game that's this interesting mix of polyomino laying in a way, where there's a shared board that depicts all these different islands that you're trying to move onto, and then essentially build up on those islands using sort of shared resources that you're collecting that you get from a cube tower. How am I doing? I'm on track. Yeah. It's cool. There's a sailing
It's
theme
the other
here.
Cube Tower one.
It's the other Cube Tower game. Yeah. I think at this point in time in board games, there was this Cube Tower resurgence. Shogun had a Cube Tower, which is a really popular game back then. And then it kind of led to all these other games saying, can we make interesting Cube Tower games? So Amerigo is one of those games. I thought that this game had a lot of novel ideas, though the sort of a shared board that you're all trying to move on to. It has an area control-ish in its own way, where you're trying to control spaces on these shared islands, but not area control in any way, shape, or form like it would feel in maybe an area majority game, like something like El Grande. I thought there were a lot of cool ideas here. It wasn't a game I felt a huge need to go back to or continue to explore. You definitely feel the Feldness of being pulled in about 15 different directions. Well, I think here is sort of having a sense for, okay, primary objective, get onto the map, put stuff onto the map. That's my goal. But yeah, I like Amerigo. For me, it feels more like an average Feld game. There's some neat stuff going on here, but it's not one that sort of sets itself apart. How do y'all feel about Amerigo?
Yeah, I almost feel like it's like too polished, which is a weird thing to say. But the Cube Tower, like the decisions are interesting because you can take any color cube that comes out, and the strength is based on the strongest cube in the lot, or the largest number of cubes in the pile, which kind of feels like it could take away like an interesting decision. And then I always was left feeling, I really love polyomino games, and there's like an interesting like kind of tactile piece when you're like putting the pieces on the islands, where you're trying to like make them all fit and like build a little puzzle. But I always was left feeling like the shapes that they give you are too uniform. Like you're given squares, you're given lines, and I wanted some like weird shapes that I had to make work. I think that would have made it a little bit more interesting for me.
Totally. Interesting example of doing polyomino tiling in a shared space. You don't see a lot of games that let you do shared space tiling in this way.
Yeah, that's a good point. Because it's also like you're trying to take over the island for yourself too.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, so I guess there is kind of area control here too.
Yeah.
And if you squint, you can find it.
If you squint.
Yeah, I'm good with C on this one. I think for me, the biggest knock against this game is I think I've played it now 3 times, twice on the table, once on Board Game Arena, where I think it's an alpha, which is kind of cool. Happy for more Feld games to get onto Board Game Arena. It just feels really samey each time. It doesn't feel like Marrakesh sounds interesting, how you get to like pick somewhat to some extent what goes in the Cube Tower, but here it's just the same stuff going into the Cube Tower. And the only diversification you get from other players is that like they're going to kind of take one cube out of the middle. So you kind of end up feeling like you're all going down similar paths, and I think it just needs like a little twist tonight. We need like some kind of like Knizia to come in here and just be like, here's what makes the scoring interesting to be better. So C it is. A sweet.
C it is.
All right. Let me Or
I
are we
moved it. The Speicherstadt?
Speaking of Knizia, I always think of the Speicherstadt as sort of like the most Knizia-ist Feld game. And that's because this is just a very simple auction mechanism. I think the Speicherstadt is like a building in the Netherlands or something like that. But what this game is, you'll play a bunch of rounds, very many rounds. And in each round, there'll be sort of a display of of cards, and then you'll have the opportunity to bid on them. And the way the bidding works in this game is actually really novel and fun. So you have meeples that you'll use to bid, and if I place a meeple into the card in the A slot, then I can buy it at the end of the round for 1 if nobody else plays into the A spot. But if somebody else also goes into the A spot, if Brendan does, and then maybe Tyler goes on top of that, now it's going to cost me 3, 1 for each meeple in that space. I'll still have the first right of refusal, being the first to go there, but I have to pay 3. And money is incredibly scarce in this game, so 3 is a ton. So I might say no, I'll pick up my meeple, and now Brendan has the opportunity to buy it, but he gets to buy it for only 2 because now that's how many meeples are there. So it's a really fun kind of, I guess, interactive type of auction that's kind of like procedural, because you're thinking like, I want to put this here to make it more expensive for other people, but then maybe, I'll be able to buy it later on the auction. And, or, if I put something down in the 5th slot, people have less money at that point potentially, so maybe they'll be forced to pick this up and I'll get this card for 1. So there's some really fun stuff going on with the auction. The cards themselves I didn't find that interesting. You're getting stuff that helps you with income, you're getting ships that contain various resources, and then contracts you're trying to fulfill with those. There's a kind of punitive element where if you have the least firemen cards, then you can get hit for negative points. That's pretty much the Speicherstadt. Where do you guys think this goes? I know we've all played it, though I think Brendan only played it on Yukata in a game that took like 4 months to complete.
Grueling.
This is an amazing game.
I also will say that I don't like hanging questions on podcasts, and our Dutch listeners will be outraged, I imagine, and our German listeners even more so. Because Jake, I looked it up. The Speicherstadt actually means city of warehouses in German, and it refers to this warehouse district in Hamburg. Okay, I don't like this game. I think that it feels. I've only played it once, but I'm just gonna go out on a limb and say it's too samey, and it's a cool mechanism, but it's not enough to support an entire auction game that feels like you said, Jake. It's so procedural. There's no drama. There's no intrigue. That's something that Feld, I think, can struggle with, and it's emphasized here. It's just like you're doing the thing. And the thing
I think you're getting a little bit led astray by that. This is like the worst asynchronous game of all time.
Okay, great. Then why'd you ask me first?
I mean, Tyler and I played this in person, and it was. I had a fun time playing it at Geekway. Where are you at with this one?
Yeah, I do not like it.
Oh my god,
that's what I'm saying.
I was gonna go C.
So no, I don't think it's a C. I think it's a D. Okay. The money just feels too tight. It feels like you don't have enough money to make the bidding.
That's what makes
meaningful.
It great. That's what makes it Knizia like.
I don't think so, because there's like one card in the deck that if you get it, it gives you like 1 money every round. So if you get that, you feel flush. Yeah. And if you don't, you're like, I have nothing.
That's what I did because I'm such a big brain Speicherstadt player.
So Jake likes it because he's won one of the games he's played.
Right.
Oh my gosh. I just think like...
Is this where I start slandering Tyler and announce that he hates Knizia games?
Don't put that out there for the public.
So that's not true.
Tyler and I agree D, right? So we outvote.
Yeah, D. All right.
D it is.
That feels like a compromise between 2 Fs and a C.
And we need something in a D or D tier too.
Okay, totally. Fair enough.
And we got to get out of the warehouse district. So that's it. Tyler, what's Luna? What is this game?
Okay, so this game I've only played once, so I'm probably gonna do a horrendous job of explaining it. But it is a weird Feld game. The board is essentially,
so that makes sense.
Oh, lines up. It's essentially like 9 different islands. So it's just a bunch of circles that you like scatter around your table. In the middle is like an area control game where you're trying to get, essentially the end goal is you're trying to get a resource tile that you can put your worker on and then put it into this grid of tiles in the middle. And based on the number on that tile you're putting in the middle, you can bump other workers off. So there is an area control aspect. That's probably the most interesting aspect of the game, in my opinion. It's kind of similar to like La Granja. You guys have played that one. But to get to that point, it's very convoluted. So on each of these islands you have around the main one, each of them have a different action that does something different. However, when you have like workers that go on these islands, and the action you take, in order to take it, you have to have a worker there. And the strength of the action is dependent on how many workers you have there. To start the game, you don't get a ton of workers. I don't remember exactly, but I want to say it's like 3, maybe 4. And so you're on very few islands, and a lot of the actions on the islands have to do with moving your workers from one island to another. So your whole action on a turn could be like moving your workers around the islands. It's a very like timing intensive game because also on the islands are like little standees, some of which help you if you take an action there. Some of them hurt you if you take an action there. So it can be very AP-y. I actually played this one with my partner, and he's like very savvy with games, picks up on rules very quickly. And he was struggling so much in this game. Like, it's the only game that I've taught him where he's just like, I don't even know how to begin to do things here. So I have a really hard time recommending it. I played it that once. I actually sold it just because it's just I just find it messy.
This is the game that made you stop collecting Feld games.
That is actually correct. It's like, okay, I don't need to own all of them.
All right, so where's it going on the tier list?
It's an easy F, for me.
All
You
right.
can play it again, but it's not great.
Well, in our tier list, then, it is an F. I will say the board just looks cool. It's one of those neat. You don't see a lot of game. Like when you walked past this game at a convention, it would be eye-catching because of the disjointed islands that are just floating on the board.
Yes.
More area control if you squint. Very interesting.
I kind of want to try it because it's one of the few
cool.
that's available online for free that I haven't tried. So I'm going to give it a try at some point on Yucata, but it's been the rules kind of teach that's set me off from trying it yet. Anyway, we got to move on. So the next game is La Isla, and this is an interesting game. I think, have we all played this one, or just me and Tyler? Okay, no Brendan on this one. So this is an interesting game that has like one of the coolest action selection mechanisms, I think, in Feld games, because it has like these like awesome multi-use cards that are just so cool, I think, in this game. So what you do in this game is you'll draw a hand of 3 cards, I think, and then for each card you have to decide which is going in, which you're going to take the A action, which you're going to take the B action, and which are you going to take the C action. And the A action, I might be missing this up slightly, but I think I pretty much got this. The A action is like a special power that kind of is going to make your player more asymmetric from other players in the game. So it might be like when you move to a certain color space on the board, and I should say the board is an island, unsurprisingly, and we play as researchers trying to catalog endangered species. So when you go to a certain space on the board, maybe you get an extra resource for going there, or maybe when you catalog a certain species, you get some bonus points. That's kind of what you'll find on the A cards. Then the B action, you get to get a cube, which are what you'll need to spend to move your workers around the board. You have to spend 2 cubes of a matching color to go onto a space. And then the C action is you're actually just determining what type of species will score at the end of the game or score the most. So if you have a moth, which is one of the species, on your C action, then you'll move a scoring tracker up on the track for moths. And those will become more valuable at the end of the game. So it has this like awesome decision space on picking what to do on your turn, because you have a very finite number of cards, and trying to figure out like your best path through them, I find really fun and satisfying. Unfortunately, like like everything else in the game that you do, it's just, it feels so linear. Like I love that action selection so much, but I just don't find the rest of the game that engaging, which is basically you're trying to like put workers on a board to surround these animal tiles so you can collect them. And that's pretty much it for that.
Which is why it's a D tier game for you? C, because you like the action selection and the multi-use cards?
It's tough. I kind of feel like D feels right. It's a game
Wow, and that's with amazing multi-use cards. That
I don't
gives you like
know.
a 3-tier rank
Tyler, what do
bump
you think?
usually.
Where are you at on this one?
Yeah, I would say like I really liked the promise of it. Like I love multi-use cards. I think the action selection was really interesting, but the cards didn't feel unique enough
Right.
to be super interesting. And it's also a lighter game than I was expecting. It's a pretty quick playing game. Like I think it plays in like 30 minutes, which for my taste for Felds, I prefer them a little on the heavier side. So I think for that reason alone, I'd personally put it in a D just because it's lighter.
I saw this was a Board Game Geek Family Game nominee for the year it was released as like Family Game of the Year, which is interesting for Feld. It's a little lighter than Healy.
It feels like kind of weird for that though, because I think kids would have a hard time
Well, it was
navigating
2014,
that. Yeah, right. Kids were smarter back then.
yeah. Back then, everyone was really exactly.
All right, let's go with D and move to the next game.
Yes. Wait, can I do this one?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Every chance you get, man.
Well, the year is mine, and it is in the year of the dragon. In the year of the dragon is maybe one of Stefan Feld's most notorious games, beloved games, but hated games. This is a brutal game of trying to build up it's a tile game. You're trying to collect tiles and build up this sort of dynasty but you're having to take into account all the things that are going to beat your potential dynasty down. So there's going to be disease and famine, and you have to feed your people. Maybe there's going to be invaders, or maybe you have to put on a fireworks show and you forgot to collect any fireworks, and that's not going to score you any points. This is at its core a novel action selection game, and the mechanism in which you create these novel pairings is really neat. So there's a deck of cards that represent all the different actions in the game, and you shuffle those up and deal them out into different groupings of those actions. Each round you do this, and that's the only thing that's variable in the game, because the order of all the other events that are going to play out are already laid out in a timeline randomly at the start of the game. And then when you're selecting your actions, however, with those cards that you've randomly paired, once a player selects a card within that pairing, say I want to take the build action, I select that and go first. And then Jake, he doesn't care about the build action, but it's paired with the action that you use to get more rice to feed your people. Because I've already taken the build action, which this round randomly was paired with the rice action, he now has to pay a hefty 3 coins to take that action. And that's just going to break the bank. It's just going to be really painful. So this game is about being incredibly flexible while knowing that there is an ideal way to essentially to play out this game if you could just select which action you took every single time, right? This game is tight, it's brutal, it's fun, and I think it has a really interesting learning curve. For me, you're both going to disagree, I bet. But for me, this is one of Feld's all-time greats. This is one of the best games he's ever designed. It airs lighter, but I would put this at S. This is fantastic.
When are you
name another game that is so unique?
Okay, so I
will kick you while you're down.
Aquasphere.
Yeah, there's no way this is going in the S tier. And I think the reason for that is that it's just like doesn't have universal appeal. Like it's so hard.
But that's the joy of it.
When do you pull this out though? You know, for
anytime you want to get kicked in the teeth.
But I might want to get kicked in the teeth, but I feel like weird insisting, forcing that kicked in the teeth upon everybody else.
Fair.
Especially if those other people are less familiar with this game than I am. Like
this
game is awesome for like the tournaments we have in the Decision Space Discord, playing with people who are really familiar with this game. But I just have a hard time ever pulling this off myself because it just feels like somebody's gonna have a bad time. Every time you play this game, there's somebody who's gonna have a really bad time. I mean, hopefully they have good attitude about it, but I mean, like somebody's gonna do terrible in this game.
You'll feel the pain.
They're gonna feel dumb. I like this game, but for me, it's more like a B.
Yeah, I own this game, but this is the only game on this list that I've not played physically. I've only played it digitally, and I think that's a good point, Jake. Like I struggle to find a time when I would bring this out and like show it to people.
Yeah, I'm in the exact same boat as you. I own it because I played it online, liked it enough to buy it, and I've never found the time to pull it off the shelf.
Yeah, and I don't think I'm yet on the other side of the learning curve. Like I've lost this game by a lot every time I played. So I think for me, it's probably like a C tier game.
Yeah. Maybe we should play at Laughing Table sometime.
Tyler's
that's a good idea.
Jake,
but even then, I'm at a B. I was gonna be a B.
Okay, so
I feel like
then it's a
B.
B. Then it becomes a
Yeah.
B. Okay. But the thing about In the Year of the Dragon, as we close, is that I will say there's few games. There's a lot of games on this list that I think would be fun to play a couple times, and they just stand up to that, right? Or maybe once. In the Year of the Dragon is one of the perfect games of if you want a game to play 25 times. If you have someone where you know you're going to just play a game over and over again,
and you know they're good
game.
sports, yeah.
Yeah, because you'll get better, and it feels so great when all of a sudden you actually have a palace that's full of people at the end, and you're like, "Look what I've done! Look what I've done!" So few games give you that. Should we just keep going?
We gotta keep going. It's gonna be our longest episode ever. We have to keep rolling through. The next game is Carpe Diem, another game that we've covered on this podcast. I think in episode 2, and we called it Stefan Feld's Masochistic Pain Land.
Yes.
It's not quite as painful.
Before In the Year of the Dragon.
Yeah, that's before we had played In the Year of the Dragon, I think, which takes the cake for that. Carpe Diem, you have basically a rondel of bays, and in each of those bays, there'll be 4 tiles. You can, on your turn, you'll move right or left and take a tile from that bay and add it to your personal player board. Very simple very simple, very simple core loop. What makes it great is the scoring in this game, where when it's your opportunity to score, once you've completed a round of the game and all the bays have been emptied, you get to put a scoring marker between 2 scoring cards that's kind of laid out like a rectangle. It's a grid. So you'll put your marker between 2 cards, and you'll have the opportunity to score those, which is cool. But more importantly, perhaps, you'll take that intersection of cards away from all the other players in the game. One of the more fun scoring systems in the game, the actual like tile placement is really punishing. And I think for like tiles that are all squares, they're designed really well to create. I find when I play this game, I'm always pulled in multiple directions playing as like, do I try and move right? There's a lot of tension between like, the tile I really want's 2 spaces away. Are other players likely to take it before I can get there? There's some other mechanisms kind of thrown in there that you can change the math by like paying some resources to skip to wherever you want or go an extra space. I think it's a really well-designed game. For me, it's A tier.
Carpe Diem is awesome. I find myself like wistfully remembering us playing this game very frequently and loving this game. It has so many novel, interesting mechanisms that just set it apart. For me, it's an A2.
Yeah, I think the scoring is like, I'm surprised no one else has used it yet, or at least not another game I'm familiar with. It feels so like refreshing and novel. It's I don't think the tile placement is as interesting for me, but I think they average out to be an A.
And it works
interestingly,
really well.
like the scoring is so complex that it's like half the game almost. Like it takes up like half the space. So I think it's well thought out and balanced to have the other half of the game being less brain burny, or else we end up in kind of the Luna territory if that was like a whole full game and then you get to the scoring thing and you've got like another full game. So a well designed, very balanced, super fun game. Carpe Diem. All right, Tyler, it's your turn.
Okay, so Merlin. So I want to caveat, I only played this game with the Arthur expansion, which may color my thoughts. But essentially, this is a really interesting game because it's a roll and move game where you have a set of 5 dice that you're rolling yourself. And it's also a rondel game. So there's a center in the middle of the board, which is a shared board. And you're rolling 5 dice, 3 in your player color, 1 white dice, and 1 black dice. And based on your results, everyone goes around and takes 1 action with 1 die at a time, similar to Castles of Burgundy. And the die that you're using is how many spaces you're moving your worker. And you're always moving clockwise. So the sum of your dice is that's going to be where you're going to end up. But the way you get there is a little bit unique based on the order of your dice that you select. Your white dice and your black dice correspond to Merlin and Arthur that are also in the center board, but those are shared. So if you're trying to take an action based on where you end up with one of those, you want to do it sooner than later, because if someone else moves that character first, then you may no longer have that action available to you because now they've moved a little bit. And so they're like too many spaces off from the action you were intending to take with them. So all of that culminates in a game that has a lot of analysis paralysis. It is a really big brain burner and you're doing a lot of counting and recounting as things change around you. What adds complexity to, there's some like like tokens you can get that allow you to break the rules of the game. Like one of them allows you to change your die to any number you want. One of them allows you to like move your character at any space on the board. So you're trying to take these individual pieces and figure out the right time to use them, while also like counting individual spaces quite a bit, like across these two different rondels. So it's really interesting, but it's a lot of counting, and it's probably the only game you'd want to play that day. So I really liked it, but I think just because of how situational it is, I'd probably put it like in the B tier.
Cool. Only Feld can pull off a B tier roll and move game.
That's a roll and move, but instead of rolling one dice, you roll many. Genius.
Right. Sounds sweet. I'd love to try
that. Dude, mental note for the next design problems episode. Roll and move.
Please no. Free us. Okay, onwards. Bonfire. This is another triple threat. We've all played
you
this
get
game.
to do it, Tyler.
Yeah.
Or Brendan.
I'll be quick. So Bonfire is another really interesting novel action selection game in which you are selecting actions by laying out these tiles in basically a grid on the side of your board, and you're trying to line those tiles up because each of them depict a potential action that you can take. So you're trying to make groupings of these certain types so that you can take more powerful versions of those actions. At the same time, you're selecting what objectives you're going for throughout the game by sailing to different islands in this top part of the board, so you can opt into more or less difficult objective scoring for one element of the game. Then you're also trying to advance these guardians along this other part of your board and moving them at the right time so you score bonuses. There's a lot going on in this game. We covered it in a whole episode. You also have shared scoring objectives that you're going for that you really want to. Oftentimes you have one that you'll really want, but when you claim it, you score it immediately. It's not an end game scoring that you're opting into. So there's this nice sort of tension between, do I take this now and just score 3 points? Even though if I wait 2 turns, I know I'd score 8. But maybe in that time, Tyler or Jake will just snatch it out from under me. So is it better to just take it now? There's crunchy decisions where you're really trying to find a novel path through the game every time you play it. I think Bonfire is one of Stefan Feld's great bread and butter games. I give it a B.
Wow. Okay.
All right, Tyler, let's roast him.
So, in terms of talking about all games, not just Stefan Feld games, in terms of all games, I think Bonfire is like probably the most impressive game that I've ever played. Like, I think there's so many unique aspects and mechanics of it that I could just like gush on and on about. Like, I think the interesting combos you can pull off with getting the engine building cards. I think that like the calling your shot with the tasks, I would love to see more games do that. I think it's like so unique, and then you can take them and then you get to choose when to flip them over, get a cool bonus. There's a lot of potential for like different combos you can take too. And I just, I have not played a game of this, and like on Yukata, I'm just sitting there like for 5 minutes thinking about like 5 turns ahead, different things I could do depending on different game situations. I think it's the only game where I've like gone really deep and tried to analyze it on a deeper level rather than just like treating it like a game. I could probably write a book about it. So it's in the Bonfire tier for me. It is above S. It is one of the best games of all time.
I love this game too, and I think there's nothing I could say to gush more, but to put a finer point on it. One of the most impressive things about this game for me is how quick it plays on the table. So it has all of that, right? Moves that you want to analyze for 4 minutes when it's your turn playing asynchronously, but also you can hammer out a 2-player game of this in literally 45 minutes and feel like you've had a really full experience. The only small criticism I have is as I play it more, I'm starting to find like similar play patterns kind of emerging. Those being, I do okay, Tyler does way better. So I'm trying to figure out, like, I don't know at this point if this is a game like I'm going to get over some learning curve and it's going to like open up even more, or if like it needs the expansion, which Tyler and I have tried to kind of like freshen it up, or maybe more expansion content down the line. But yeah, absolutely one of my favorites. I think it was my highest rated Feld on my last top 10 games of all time list, or whatever we did. So I would probably I think I have to put it in S as well. But for me, it's kind of like right between. I'd be happy with S or A.
I'm not going to take it away from y'all. We could put it in S.
Yeah,
But,
we got
like,
it.
I wish I want to move it in the year of the dragon up. Okay, moving on.
I'd take that trade. We can make that trade.
Yeah?
Okay.
Jake's like, no, move on.
All right, Kokopelli. We got to keep it going. Yeah, we don't go back. We don't backtrack. We only go forward.
So Kokopelli is Stefan Feld's game, in my opinion, that is closest to a Knizia card game.
Okay.
So it's a really interesting game where you have a deck of cards in the middle and of your player board. On your player board, you have 4 spots where you can play those cards. However, in addition to playing them in front of you, you also have the opportunity to play them in the 2 spots of your neighbors. So you can play them in 8 spots total, 4 of yours, and then your neighboring 2 on each side. However, when you play a card into your area, it gives you a unique player power. So it gives you something like novel you can do. And essentially what you're trying to do is set collection. So you have 3 cards of each color corresponding to each player power in your deck. You're trying to get all 3 of them in front of you to make a set, which then gets you points. But in doing so, it removes those cards from your board. So you lose the player power. So it's a really interesting like push and pull. If you're trying to make the sets, because it's what you do, gets you points, but you want to hold on to your good powers while you can. And at the same time, you can play your cards into your neighbors' areas to finish off their sets. And doing so gets you the points for completing the set and also removes their player powers.
Well, that is really Knizia.
Yeah. It's like take cool. Thatty. It's set collection. And it's very different from anything else Feld has done. And they also give you quite a bit of different like colors within the box. So every time you're going to be playing with a different set of cards and different like powers in the box. I think there's also like 2 or 3 expansions as well that add more cards. So I really like it. I'd probably put it. I mean, B tier is really full, so I'd maybe say C.
No, you don't. No.
Put it in B.
Just put it where you think it. Yeah, we don't have to have everything perfectly balanced, you know.
But yeah, it's a B game for sure.
Okay, maybe we can smooth it out a little bit at the end if we need to. Okay, awesome, great. That's another one I would be eager to try. The other game when I'd mentioned 2. That one's still to come.
Yeah, it plays in like 30 minutes too. It's really quick.
Nice. All right, yeah, we got to get to it. Okay, so the next game/games on our list is one of these Queen game re-implementation and the original. We'll talk about them both here, though I will insist upon them being in different tiers, and those are Bruges and its re-implementation as Hamburg. So another game that we've done an episode on, Bruges/Hamburg, is a game where you have multi-use cards and you're essentially moving in different point scoring avenues. So you're trying to build houses and fill them with people. If you have the most people in a house at the end of a round, you'll win a majority. You can also win a majority for building out canal pieces. And score points for completing those canal sections. You can also score a majority for moving the highest up the reputation track, which is by which you move up by spending a variable amount of money at the beginning of your turn. If you're playing with the expansion, you can also win a majority for animals. And there's one other majority that I think I am forgetting. Dang it. But that's kind of the gist of what you're doing in this game. You're playing cards, the multi-use cards. You can play them for workers, you can play them for money, you can play them as houses, or you can play them for people. So you always have a really fun amount of decision space on your turn as you try and kind of min-max your way to the most possible points in this big point salad game. The last thing that I have to mention with this is it has a really fun mitigation of risk system where if you roll, there'll be a shared set of dice rolled at the beginning of the round that will determine the values that you can sell certain cards for money, but they'll also give you threat tokens if a 5 or a 6 is rolled in a certain color, and when you get a full set of 3 threats, then you suffer whatever the penalty is. So you have to decide like when is it right to risk it and when is it the right time to mitigate that risk and waste an all important card on your turn. So that is Bruges and Hamburg. I'll say the main difference in Hamburg is that instead of having 2 stacks of cards all shuffled together, you get to pick which type of card you draw on your turn, and there's an extra suit of cards, the black cards, and there's an extra way that you can potentially get threats, or sometimes just a nice benefit instead, totally randomly, and it has different cards too. I think they've kind of been rebalanced. So what do you guys think of Bruges / Hamburg? I know that we've all played Bruges, and then Tyler and I have also played Hamburg.
Tyler, go for it. What do you think?
Yeah, I like them both. I would say I definitely like Bruges better. I do like the 2 decks instead of the multiple. And I think the risk system, I don't really like how they changed that, because they also added like a black cube as well, which gives you the random risk.
Right.
And then I think the art direction is like significantly worse in Hamburg. But yeah, I really like the kind of like take that nature of it, which is not typical for me, but I think it works really well in Bruges. And the risk mitigation is really interesting. So I'd probably put Bruges in B and Hamburg in C.
I would put Hamburg in C, but Bruges in S or A. I'd be okay with A.
I think that Bruges is one of my favorite Feld games. It's the mixture of dice drafting alongside, or the sort of dice optimization puzzle that you're playing with alongside the multi-use cards, and the combos that you can pull off there, for me, just gives one of the most unique decision spaces I've ever seen. And it almost feels like you're being invited by Feld to play a juggling game in which you're juggling 5 different types of objects, right? So you're like juggling a sword, a bowling pin, a ball, a cat, and a plate, just all at once. And it's just a joy to play. It feels breezy while offering real decisions to chew on. For me, that's to go with A. So
let's
Jake,
go A.
We're compromising for A.
I think,
and then C for
as
Hamburg.
long as we're saying with the expansion, I think Bruges and A makes total sense.
That's a good point.
Rivers on the Zwin.
And we are considering it with the expansion, which can be yours for like a cheap $150 on the secondary market.
Just proxy. Okay, Bruges and Hamburg done. Macao. Are we doing Macao and Amsterdam together too?
So has anybody played Amsterdam?
I've played Amsterdam, so I can talk about it.
And I've only played Macao, yeah.
Yeah, so this is it's dice drafting, right? But you get to pick the dice. Yeah, but you're not taking dice away from people.
Right, that's
so
right.
Each round, dice are rolled into the middle, and everyone gets to choose one. The pips on the die dictate where on this wheel you're going to put cubes. And you can put, essentially, if you take a 6, you're going to get... Thank you. You're going to get 6 cubes, but you have to wait till the 6th round to use them. So it's a lot of like delayed gratification and kind of like risk reward balancing. And then the other key mechanism is you also have to take a card every turn too, which is both a good thing and a bad thing, because the card gets you some unique abilities. But the card also, you have to buy it with these cubes, and if you don't, you suffer penalties in the form of negative points. But you also need to use those cubes to buy different spots on this board to get points, to move your ship around and deliver goods. So these cubes have a lot of different uses, and you want to try and use them smartly, but you also have to make sure that you can pay off your debts when they come due.
And
one of the craziest thing is like the cards that you're going to be going for are like visible the whole game. So you can like see from turn 1 that on turn 12, like these 2 office cards will be there for you to take, which is just like, that's a pretty wild decision that I don't know that adds like a ton to the game. I'm not good enough at the game that I've ever like paid too much attention to that. Maybe you want to think like a few turns ahead or whatever to help you with the decision of which of the dice you want to select. But yeah, that's kind of a wild one.
That's a classic Feld decision though, right? Like designing a game in which you can see all of these things that are randomly determined at the start.
Very in the Year of the Dragon about it.
I'm going to jump in and say, I think Macao is more interesting than it is fun. C.
Interesting.
Okay, I was going to go
A? Okay, I'll play it again. I've only played it once.
I mean, I've only played it once on the table. I've played it more times than that on Yukata. I think it's pretty solid. I think like the Windrose mechanism of like doing the dice drafting and like the inherent trade-offs between getting it now and the planning.
We just put Bruges in A tier. Bruges.
I mean, I think it's okay. I mean, I could settle for B. I can settle for B.
I'm sorry.
I think Macao is squarely a B. The difference in Amsterdam is there's like 2 big design changes. One is that you get to take 1 cube and keep it from round to round, which actually ends up mattering a lot because sometimes you need like that 1 red cube along with 3 black cubes to finish off a card. And then the other big change is they added a little bit more to the ship board. So there's a little bit more of like a pick up and deliver, which I think makes that section a lot more interesting. So I would put Macao in B and Amsterdam in A because of those tweaks.
Cool.
Wow.
All right. I'm fine with that.
Jake,
I'm happy with
Jake
that.
still gets his A. A for Amsterdam. Okay. Oracle of Delphi.
Okay.
Ooh, spooky.
All right.
It's not
Oracle
spooky.
of Delphi is the only race game that we're talking about today. So in Oracle of Delphi, you are essentially a little Odysseus. You play as a boat. You're Odysseus's boat, we shall
You're
say.
all Odysseus.
Yeah,
at the same
everyone
time.
is
Okay, cool.
Odysseus's different boat. And what you want to do in this game is everybody has the same 12 heroic tasks that they have to achieve. The way you achieve these tasks is by doing like a pick up and deliver, by doing kind of a push your luck dice game, by doing a little bit of like matching type of thing. And you have to complete all the tasks, go all over the board, and then get back to the center. The first person to do that wins the game. The way you play this game, the interesting action selection is on your turn, you'll roll 3 oracle dice. Those will have different symbols, and you'll be able to match those symbols up with spaces on the board to dictate where you're able to move your boat. You can also spend those actions to interact, or spend those dice to interact with other things on the board as well. One thing I really like about this game that I mentioned previously on the podcast is there's like a god track where each person has their own personal player board god track, where one of the things you can do with the dice is move the matching god up one space on their track. And as long as you have that moved off of the bottom 0 space to 1, then on anybody else's turn, if they happen to roll a color matching that god, you may choose to move it up 1 space, hoping to get to the top so you can activate really powerful one-time effects. That'll be these big swingy moments in the game. I like how it has really fun push your luck and kind of like risk mitigation. There's a punitive element here, which we've seen in a lot of other games, where you can take damage from one of the black dice. One player will roll the black dice, the start player, and that will deal damage to people. So you can spend actions to get rid of some of those damage cards, or you could just hope that you don't draw one that's going to cause you to skip your entire turn. One of the most like punishing things we've seen in any of these games. So that's Oracle of Delphi. I think it's a C. What do you think, Tyler?
I actually really like it. I think that the dice rolling mechanism I find really interesting, like in this space, and I really like I found that I really like task completion games where you're assigned a task and you have to find the most efficient way to do that. And every time you complete a task, you get a reward, and the reward is different depending on which task you've completed. So it's a really interesting efficiency puzzle to me for me, like plan out like which route I'm going to take and when I do, which rewards I'm going to get and how I use them. I'd say the thing that brings this game down the most for me is that there is a lot of luck involved. You're rolling dice for your actions, but then also one of the tasks you have to complete is killing monsters, which means you have to roll like a 9. Some people roll that at one time. Some people have to use all the resources to like make 5 rolls to kill the monster, which can feel really punishing.
Before you say where you're placing this, make sure you place it with the rules as written and not your own house rule version that we played with.
I've won a house rule tweak.
House rule rank and regular rank.
Yeah. So with my house rule, it's an A. Without my house rule, I think it's a B.
Okay, interesting. I think it's really. I haven't played this game, Jake. Where you said C, Tyler.
I said
B.
C.
So where should we put it?
We could put it in C.
You're just trying to smooth out the. There's a lot.
I want a clean distribution here.
All right, wait. Look, put it in B for now. At the very end, we'll take a couple from B and move them down. Whatever we think is least deserving.
It's really cool that it's a race to finishing these 12 tasks, but it's not that you have to do them in any specific order, right? You just have to finish the 12 tasks. Mm-hmm. So that's a really interesting way to structure a race game where you sort of say, you have to run these 12 legs, but you can do them in whatever order you want. I think that's a cool conceit for a game.
It's another one of these games too where you can see almost everything at the beginning. Yeah. So like once you start going one way, hopefully you picked the right way. Because like there is more and less efficient ways you could choose to navigate this board, and you'll see that at the very beginning.
And it could be tricky too, because sometimes you have a plan pathed out, but then someone like takes that cube along your path, and you're like, okay, I guess I have to go all the way back.
Oh.
All right.
Bora Bora.
Bora Bora. I haven't played this one. This is the other one that I'm most excited to try. I can't believe I haven't got to this yet.
We need to play it. It's honestly like the action selection part is the part I like the least about it. It's a dice drafting game. I guess that's maybe not the right way to put it, because you roll your dice, you have your own dice, and then you're choosing actions by putting your dice on these 5 spots on the board. However, the stronger your die is, like the higher number, the stronger the action you're going to take. But you can only put your die there if it's lower than every other die that's already been put on that action. So if Jake puts a 5 out on this one action I really want to take, but I only have 6s, I can't put any die there. Like I cannot take that action, which means I have to go somewhere else.
Or you could block a space with a 1.
Yes, you could put a 1 and block it. There are like some things you can get to like tokens to overrule those rules, but that's like it is, you don't want to spend them if you can help it. What I really like about the game too is that, similar to some of these other games we've been talking about in terms of like these objectives or these tasks you've been given, every round of the game you have to complete a task, and you have 3 that you get to choose from in front of you. If you can't, you get 0 points and you have to get rid of 1. But if you can, you get 6 points. And that's a lot of points, because you're going to be completing like 9 of these tasks throughout the game. So it could be a swing of 54 points if you lean into that versus if you don't do any of them. And what's really cool is, to complete a task, you don't have to give anything up. You just have to have whatever it's looking for. So have a certain number of resources, or have like a certain number of tiles that it wants. So you can kind of be strategic of like, okay, I'm going to get these things, complete the task, and then I'm going to use them to help me move into getting this other task. There's other parts of the board too, in terms of like area control and like putting huts out, getting different engine building things. But that task system is what I find really compelling about the game. And it steals those god powers from Oracle of Delphi. Those are also a part of this game, where you can get different cards that help you kind of break the rules in really compelling ways, but they're really hard to get, and you kind of spend it and it's done. So it's kind of, you're looking for your moment to seize on that resource too.
Sounds cool.
Yeah, I really like it. I've only played it once, but I really want to go back to it. I'd put it in the A tier.
All right.
Ooh,
A tier it is.
A tier Bora Bora.
All right. 2 left. We're at the finish line here. And the next one that we must discuss is Trajan, the most epic feeling Feld game to me. Of the ones I played, when this one comes out at game night, like this feels like an epic board game night. And maybe that's partly just because I like this game so very much. Trajan is a game that is shamelessly point salad mini games. There's 6 different actions in the game that you'll be taking. There's the forum. No, what is it called? The Senate. The Senate, where you'll move up the Senate. Whoever has the most points in the Senate gets some end game scoring tile. There's the forum, where you get to, I'm not going to say all these because I don't really know, but basically there's 6 mini games. One is like a map where you're moving your soldiers around trying to score points. One is a set collection game where you're drawing cards and trying to find different types of sets, like pairs or all different or all the same, and ship them off. There's the one I described at the Senate. There's one that's just like windows. That feels pretty themeless. And then there's one that's just getting action squares. That one feels pretty themeless. And then the best part of the game is the one where you get to manipulate your own Mancala bowls to create your own objectives, of which you will complete by matching 2 of the correct colors into the bowl that triggers the bonus tile that you've selected. Woof. Got through it. That's basically Trajan. It's all about the bowls, though, in this game. Like the Mancala action selection, bar none, my favorite action selection mechanism in any of these games, many of which have superior action selection mechanisms going on.
So is it where do you put A?
I would put it S. I would put it S.
S. Tyler, where do you put it? What's your thoughts?
No, he's right there. It's an S game. The Mancala is just like so fascinating, because you want to be thoughtful about like what you're doing next, but you also want to be thoughtful about how many of these little wooden pieces you're putting into the next bowl, because that's going to influence what actions are available to you on the next turn. So it's very brain burnery, but in like a really like fascinating way.
It can have a bit of downtime, but I thought about this as like for our downtime problem episode, because it has like such an involved puzzle that you're trying to figure out on your own turn. Because as Tyler's describing, it's not just enough to pre-plan one turn ahead. You literally have to be thinking 2, 3, 4 turns ahead if you want to do a good job of matching up these bonus tiles, which feels of everything in this game. I don't know if you'd agree, Tyler. And maybe people have played this much more than I have. I've only played it a handful of times, maybe 3 or 4 now, 4 or 5 maybe. It feels like those bonus tiles on the Mancala part of the game are mandatory. Like you have to do well at that game.
I would disagree with that. I think one of the reasons I like this game so much, it feels like you can go in a lot of different pathways. Like I know last time we played this, you leaned really hard into just like getting points with those tiles.
Yeah. But no matter what, I mean, like you get like, I'm not just the points, but like the fact that you get like the resource, like the automatic resources early in the game to like feed your people.
With the 3 first ones you get during setup. Because I do think you need the like feed the people ones. I think you need at least one of those, but I think you could get by without getting a ton more.
Wow. All right. So I haven't solved it yet, but I think we agree it's a great game.
Yeah, I think it's 2, almost best at 4, just because it gives you the downtime to like solve your individual puzzle before it gets back to you.
Yeah. The game demands downtime, folks.
Tyler's incredible. That's the best argument I've ever heard for someone to be like, I want their